I'm so happy we did this. I've been wanting to do this for years. I feel like in my kind of experience of talking about technology, iOS has always, and iOS and the iPhone and all the Apple products, the mobile Apple products, have always been such an important part of the evolution of the last 10 years of technology, let's say. Yet I always had an outsider view of it.
You never used an iPhone
one.
ever?
No, I'd never used one.
Wow, that's
not
weird.
and especially not in day-to-day use. Like, it would have one, you know, like, hey, check this out.
Play with it. Yeah.
They give it to me for a couple of minutes, but never living with one.
Megan, have you ever had an Android phone? You did.
Yes,
yeah?
I had an Android phone.
Back in the day.
Yes, back in the day, I had the Palm Pre. I didn't have the iPhone until just a couple of years ago, actually. But I've always been a Mac user. I was just forced into using Android, and I don't hate it.
That's the praise we're looking for.
Yeah, and how about you, Jason? Do you hate iOS?
No, I actually don't hate iOS at all.
Okay.
No,
we do not hate.
Yeah.
This is a non-hate
We don't hate
episode. Here. All right. Well, how should we play this? Do you want to start, Megan?
Well, Jason has some notes. I'm going to be on his show tomorrow to talk about my experience. This is really just his experience with the iPhone 7.
So tomorrow on All About Android, you're going to come into the lion's den and tell them why you hate their operating
At the end of the show, we'll do a little to be continued. And you got to
and I'm agnostic in this battle because I use both, and I actually really like both. Although of late I've been using the iPhone maybe a little bit more because I've been using the Apple Watch during my workouts, and so I want to have the iPhone with it. But I love both. I think both have a lot to recommend themselves.
I mean, I think ultimately in almost a month, tomorrow being the actual official month, I think, and then, you know, at the end of tomorrow, we actually do the device swap back and life returns to normal. But what I've realized about myself, and I'm sure that this translates to others, is that we're super adaptable. Like, I think for me, after having used Android for years and years and years, there was a little bit, good or bad reasons, there was a little bit of fear of like walking away from something that I'm used to and trying something different. And what I realized at the end of the month is, I mean, it's just another OS that does the same darn thing. You know what I mean? It does it in different ways. Some things it does very similarly to Android. Some things it's less, as they say, open, you know, and a less kind of, I don't know, it doesn't give you as much access and as much freedom to the OS. But maybe that's not a bad thing. Some people don't need all of that. You know what I mean?
Let me propose this, because this is kind of what I observe. And I talk to a lot of people on both sides. In fact, on the radio show, a lot of people call me and say, I'm going to get my first iPhone, or I'm going to get my first Android phone. I'm moving. What should I expect? And what it kind of, I think, boils down to, but you correct me if I'm wrong, is that for iOS users, Android can be overwhelming. There's so many configuration options. There's so many different ways you can make the screen look. You can, in fact, make it look just like an iPhone. You could actually use it just like an iPhone.
Sure.
But you feel challenged to try some of these other things, and that can be overwhelming. And people who go from Android to iOS, I think sometimes feel a little bit constricted. Like, I want to do this one thing. Why can't it do that? I can't share to this from this. And so they have expectations that aren't met by iOS. But I think if you live in those slots all the time, you don't encounter these problems. You're perfectly happy with iOS. You're perfectly happy with Android.
Yeah.
Well, if you take a step back, I mean, some people just don't even, there's different flavors of Android. I think some people who buy like a Samsung phone don't even realize that they have other options.
Yeah.
Like that's the thing, the launchers. That was the thing that I never
like
used.
A launcher? What is a launcher?
Exactly.
That's a good example, because I think Android people say, well, you mean I'm stuck with the Springboard? The only launcher I can use is that? And you didn't even want to change launchers. It's like, well, no, this is what it came with.
Right.
Why do I have to change launchers?
Right, but I was using the Pixel launcher, so that was, some people argue that is the best.
Well, and I mean,
it's not my favorite, but
yeah, well, that's the thing, right? Android, you have a million and one different options, alternatives for these launchers. The Pixel launcher, just as that phone is concerned, is what launches with the device, what is installed on the device when you get it. And so I think many people are fine to receive the phone based on the vision that whoever made it had for it and live within those confines. But other people know that there's other things like Nova Launcher or other ways to tweak it and really kind of take that experience and make it their own, add in a lot of customization so that I don't have to go into the app drawer to find that app. All I have to do is tap the screen twice and my favorite app launches. Little things like that, different launchers give you capabilities.
A lot of the innovation under Android happens in the launcher, actually. But here's one thing you've got to give props to iOS for, and that's battery life.
Battery life, yes.
Because iOS locks the system down, and controls what's running in the background, controls what apps can do. They get amazing battery life out of those.
I, out of sheer laziness, have gotten into the habit of not plugging it in at night because I knew it would make it to the next day.
Can't do that with any Android.
I mean, you probably could with some Android devices, but consistently I did that with the iPhone. Also partially to just like try and test it out, push it to the limits as far as that's concerned, really see how far I could get on one charge. And I mean, it would get me well into the next day to where I come into work and I can plug it in and feel fine. My main problem with the battery on the iPhone is not that the battery life isn't good. It's that my experience with charging compared to fast charging and quick charge on the Android side of things, I want 15 minutes to give me a maximum amount of charge. And you don't really, or at least I don't. I haven't noticed that with the iPhone. I would have to plug it in for a solid hour and a half, 2 hours to get something very significant, the majority of the battery charged up. And I don't feel like that's the case with a lot of the Android phones that are made nowadays, the top of the line ones.
Did you ever feel, Megan, insecure? Because that's the other side of this equation, is that Android is a little bit scary sometimes because there's more malware and not. Fortunately, you had the Google phone, which is updated, as quickly as any phone out there, more quickly than most. But did it ever make you nervous?
Yeah, I did feel a little bit uneasy sometimes, especially, I went to the Women's March and I felt like, I was looking into what it's like to be a protester and how people are sucking up your data. And I did think about that. I thought, I kind of have an idea of how much of my information is being revealed by Apple versus I don't really know. And I don't think Google was using that to label me as a political dissident or anything.
Oh, you're using Android list. Yeah, you're on the list. But
I for sure think that they're using that to sell me things.
Right.
Absolutely. There are a lot of more, every time you download an app, there's a lot more like, I have to give it, this and this and this. And
permissions.
Android Auto was asking me permissions to use my microphone, and I thought, what is it recording, from me? And it's just really because it wants me to.
You can dictate
to know
it.
The wake
access
word,
to different hardware features.
Yeah,
basically.
I did feel a little bit more insecure. There weren't any updates. I know you dealt with a software update in the last month, and you.
Boy, howdy, did I ever deal with one?
What happened?
It appeared, and I accepted it, and it came, and I realized. Wouldn't it be nice for all platforms for an update to hit all devices on a platform at the same time? Like that's one thing that iOS definitely has going for it.
Right.
You know what I mean? And mind you, I'm very used to Google's phones, so the Nexus, the Pixel, I get those updates pretty regularly from there. But I can't help but be just a little jaded about the fact that most people don't. Most people on Android have a really hard time being up to date. A new version of Android comes out. I mean, what is Nougat at right now? Like, is it even at 1%? And, we're how many months into it? Even Marshmallow is low numbers compared to when on iOS an update happens, a major system update happens. What is it? Like 80, 90% of all the devices are going to get updated. Some of them, if they're too old, might have some of the features kind of pulled out of it, but you're still going to get that major update and you're going to get it right away. You're not going to be waiting months or maybe even a year for it to happen. And that's one thing that I really wish Android had. That's a very strong point of iOS.
You do have to love it that Android names its versions after desserts, though, right? I mean, there is.
True.
Is that a good consolation prize?
We can call iOS 10 Jelly Donut if we want to.
Was there a feature on Android that you saw, that you used, that you wished that iOS had?
Oh, that's a good question. I did enjoy being able to move my apps and put them anywhere I wanted, which is weird, but I like that as opposed to them snapping to a grid all the time.
Did you use widgets at all?
I did use a few widgets. Like I like having my podcast widget there so that I can turn it.
That's confusing to iOS users because widgets to iOS are something in the notification pane. You have widgets, but on Android you could put them anywhere on the desktop. So you could have a podcast, player on your desktop with controls and everything. So you don't have to open the app to pause it.
I did like that. I liked LastPass was so much easier to use on Android.
Yeah, that was one of my biggest kind of annoyances.
So LastPass is the password vault we recommend, but this is true actually of 1Password and Dashlane and the other password vaults too. What does it do on Android that it doesn't do on iOS?
It overlays inside the app so that you can when I'm using different apps in iOS, I have to cut and paste or use the share sheet to get my password in there. It's just more, it's just was easier to use.
That's an example of Android letting third-party developers have access to a lower level of other apps. On iOS, everything is kind of sandboxed intentionally for security reasons.
Yeah.
So one app can't kind of interact with another app. LastPass can sit and watch you run apps and say, oh, I recognize a login screen on Facebook, for instance. I'll fill that in or offer to fill that in for you. And I agree that's a convenience feature. iOS fans might say, yeah, but it's also a huge security risk.
That's kind of what I had down in my notes, right? iOS isn't as generous when it comes to giving access to these underlying mechanics of the OS, which is both a good and a bad thing. You know, it's bad because maybe not bad's the wrong word, but for me, it was not as great because when I'm on Android, I feel like I can move a little bit faster. Things are a little bit more dynamic. Having that window appear over the top of whatever login screen I'm at and just going, yes, fill it with that login ID. Here's my thumbprint to give you access to that, and boom, it's done, and move on. Here, it's more of a manual process. Doing all that is annoying, but then at the same time, Apple does a really good job, like I think iOS in general does a really good job of making an environment that's comfortable and I'll put it in air quotes because maybe people would disagree, but trustworthy. You know what I mean? Apple has gone to lengths to, I think, make decisions that they think are good for the user. And, you know, then when you come back to this whole thing of like, well, you're using it wrong,
right.
You know, that we've experienced time and time again. And I mean, maybe that's the downside to that belief. But I think ultimately that's why the iPhone is really, really popular, because it's made with the user in mind to a large degree. And sometimes that just doesn't give some people as much power and control as they want. Those people are probably better suited for Android.
It goes back actually to the very earliest days of the Macintosh, when the people who made the Macintosh, including, and we should give credit to Jeff Raskin, whose idea this was, but Steve Jobs, who continued the idea with the development and later put it in iOS, that there really should be one way to do things and one path, because the human brain, once it learns that path, follows that path. And that was always kind of the philosophy. We've drifted away a little bit, but I think that's where you get the comfort that Apple has already decided the path,
right,
the way you'll do things. And yeah, maybe a little bit more difficult to fill in a password, but once you kind of have the, you know, double tap, go to the other one.
I totally got used to it.
You kind of get used to it.
I completely
and then that's
got
the
used
one
to
way
it.
to do things. And the difference is on Android, much like Windows, there's many ways to do anything. And that can be overwhelming for people who just you know, show me the one way and I'll just do it that way. But then there are geeks like us who say, well, but I have I think it goes down to actually you build a conceptual model in your brain of how the device works. And this is the biggest problem both of you have, which is you have a conceptual model in your brain of what this glass slab is, and you've learned it and you've adopted to it, and your model is in somewhat warped by moving to the other thing where the model is different. It's not so, you're right, it isn't that different. Computer is a computer, but you have a conceptual model, and that's what you use when you say, well, what happens when I do this? Well, I think this will happen. And if it doesn't happen that way, then it's a little disruption.
Yeah, and I think that is right there the reason why Megan and I chose to do a month instead of forever. Week. You know, and what I kind of
week. Oh, okay.
Well, I mean, when we were initially talking about it, we were like, well, how long do you do this? Like, is a week
month
long
is perfect,
enough?
I think.
And it's like, no, a week is like long enough for you to be annoyed with it because it isn't what you're used to.
That's right.
A month is long enough to where, like, and I feel like this is kind of played out a little bit in our activity of tweeting with the TWiT switch hashtag. It really kind of fell off a little bit in the past couple of weeks. Personally, I would say because the last couple of weeks are my weeks where I've adapted. And I'm realizing less. I'm just using it. It's my platform that I use now, and there's less that really jumps out at me because we're adaptable people, and you adapt to it, and now that's just the way it
takes you about that long.
Works.
It takes you about a month to build that model in your mind, and then it behaves as you expect.
Yeah,
right?
I see it as like a river, right? Like the rivers, you know, the water bears down and you've got the river, but you can put a rock in it and switch the river, move it a little this way, that way. Like I've gotten used to things. I'm more comfortable with it. I don't want to stay. It's not like I'm going to switch for good. I want my river to move back into iOS.
Would you be willing to switch to iOS?
For good, how do I answer this? It's a platform that I could use. I could use it 100% of the time. Do I want to? I don't, because in general, I feel kind of bored with it, to be honest.
Yeah,
I feel like, and
you can't tweak it as much.
And I kind of go back around to this is like, I feel a general sense of boredom with the OS. And I don't know if that's because of a lack of kind of customization or features or whatever, or what that's from. But I feel like I'm engaged more when I'm on Android than I am with iOS. With iOS, it's a device that gives me the email when I want it, lets me make a phone call when I want it, check my Twitter feed, read some news, whatever. And on Android, I do all those things too, but yet I still feel like engaged with the OS to a different level. And so I kind of like, I don't know how to describe it, but it feels like a computer in the cloud that I just access when I need to here. That, it's like my computer.
Right.
You know what I mean? I don't know if that's a good analogy.
No, I think it's a great insight because I think Android attracts ADD types who want to constantly fiddle. And we see it really once you writ large when you get to rooting and custom ROMs. I know a lot of people, I was even in this boat, that try a different ROM every single day.
I've been there.
Right?
I don't do that anymore, but I've been there.
And that's something you can do on Android.
Yeah,
and it does engage you because you're playing with it all the time. Yeah. But I think also there are a lot of people, and I would think, Megan, you're probably one of them, who just, it's an appliance. You just want it to work. Yeah. You don't want to put mental energy into it. It's a tool for you.
Exactly. That's what I would like.
And I think that speaks to what a lot of people would actually like. Like, does the majority
sell 78 million of them for nothing, right?
Does the majority of people really want to obsess about their phone? They want to use a phone, and they want to make a call, or they want to write an email. Yeah. There's just different type of users, and I guess that's what it boils down to. They do the same things, they do it a little bit differently. They're going to appeal to different.
We
types of users.
observed that on Tech TV. That's why we had 2 shows. Call for Help was for people like you, Megan, the people who saw computers as tools. And the screensaver was for people like Jason, who are enthusiasts, who saw it as a toy, something they wanted to play with and engage with and interact with. And I think those are both very legitimate attitudes. And it is a pretty clear, demarcation between those 2 types. Is there anything on Android that you will miss, Megan?
Oh, that's a good question.
Any feature that you say, gosh, I wish iOS had this one thing?
That is a good
fingerprint
question.
on the back.
Not the fingerprint on the back.
Why not? Why didn't you like that?
I don't know.
That's where the Pixel puts it. By the way, Android devices have that, and this is the other thing that's great about Android. You can choose to have a fingerprint reader anywhere you want, including the front. Right. Just depends on the device you choose. But I think a Pixel is a good one to do because it's kind of the Google phone. It's the most pure version of Android. But you could get it on the front. Just Samsung puts them on the front.
I did like being able, I have tried the Nova launcher, and I do like that. That is
See, my favorite's Action Launcher.
Right. Oh.
So.
That's good too.
I do like the assistant. I like how I can ask it to open apps and play, ask it to open my podcast app and play podcasts where you can't do that with Siri. It's just podcasts app. I did like that. I will miss that.
Did you get into, so Siri and Google now are very different, and Google Assistant on the Pixel, which is even more Google now, are very different. Did you kind of get to the point where you felt like you could use Google Now in a more fluid way?
And you knew what would work and what wouldn't.
Yes. Like we were friends and we were having a conversation.
And did you find you used it more than Siri?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And did you feel limited by Siri?
Yeah, absolutely. I felt like with Siri, I feel like I'm being scolded when Siri talks.
Yeah, Siri is really kind of.
I just found a general sense of, and I really tried to use Siri as much as I use Google. What I realized in this is how much I use Google Assistant and Voice Assistant on Android. Yeah. But I tried to use it as much as I do on Android, and I just feel like half the time it gave me a web search instead of something else. I don't know what I was looking for. A lot of times it just wasn't very good at inferring what I meant. Or, you know what I mean? Like
I know totally what you mean.
I feel with Assistant, I can get really creative with how I phrase things, and Google's knowledge on the back end is going to understand how to twist that into the command that it was meant to receive. And I don't get that with Siri. And I feel like good voice assistants have to have that. Like, because no one wants to learn a syntax. We just want to talk to it and have it understand what we do. And I feel like with Siri, I had to constantly kind of figure out how I do this so that Siri will understand it.
Google Assistant's a lot closer to that.
I'm really going to miss Android Auto, which is the app that I used every single day.
You were excited about that.
I was, because I have the bad habit of checking my text messages at stoplights, not while I'm driving. And Android Auto, now whenever my phone hooks up to Bluetooth, Android Auto, the app, pops up. Like, I don't have it in my car. I have an older car, and it pops up, and it just gives me what I need to do. I mean,
with big letters, big buttons. It's designed for driving.
Yes, and if I try to scroll around too much, it tells me to stop.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess that shows my iPhone-ness. Like, I still need a nanny. Like, I want a nanny to tell me.
There are apps that do that on the iPhone that you could launch, that would give you a simplified interface.
Is there no way to
it doesn't do it automatically?
No.
And that's, that's an example of Apple not giving third-party applications access to things like which Bluetooth device is attached, or whether the accelerometer, whether we're moving more than 7 miles an hour, or any of those things. And so that's something, it's funny because that's a new feature of Android. That was just
it's relatively
a couple months ago.
Yeah. Well, what about 3D Touch? That was something you liked.
Yeah, I was going to say a couple of things that I'm going to miss. 3D Touch was one of the bigger surprises for me.
Wow, interesting.
I use it a lot.
Really?
Which is weird because I've used kind of very sparingly the version that you get on Android Assistant or on Google Assistant, which is not 3D Touch necessarily. It's more a tap and hold. And you never really know what you're going to get. Maybe it has support for things. But I got very playful with it on iOS and just started kind of using it to see what would happen. And I realized more often than not, it gave me the option in doing so that I was hoping to get. Yes. Oh, there's the reply thing that I was hoping to see when I 3D touched that thing. Cool. There it is. Boom. So I really like that. I also, obviously, the camera. This is the 7 Plus.
Do you think that's a better camera than the
Dual camera on the back. I couldn't tell if it was better necessarily, but I could tell that I like the pictures that it took. And I especially...
That zoom is fantastic.
The zoom is really nice. I would love to have that. But I really... I kind of was surprised at how much I enjoyed the portrait mode. Portrait mode. I use the portrait mode.
Look at
I'd
these.
say
They're beautiful
half the time. And yeah, the pics of my girls.
Lucy, your daughter. Yeah.
I don't know. It just Now what I'm noticing here, though, to go back to that, is this is being hosted on Google Photos, and I feel like around her hair with the background,
there's some issues.
There's some issues right there. I didn't see that on the phone. But I see it when it uploaded there. I don't know if that's
typical of portrait because of how it works. Right. It doesn't always figure out what's in the foreground and what's in the background. But
I mean, I ended up using it pretty regularly because I was pretty happy with the results. I mean, pictures in general were really nice.
Yeah, lens blur on this phone does not work as well.
Not the same.
Yeah, it's not the same.
There are Android phones, LG makes them, and some others that have zoom cameras, have 2 lenses, and you can zoom in. But I think Apple's implemented it really nicely. This is Apple?
This is this is the iPhone. I do miss actually off of the video recording from the Pixel, that stabilization that Google put into there. I'm realizing how nice it is to have that. You get a little bit of that bumpiness without it on other phones. But
I think this is a case where it's a tie. There are good things about both. The Pixel has some great, like the stabilization features. The iPhone has some great features. Both of them are excellent cameras. Did you feel like you were unhappy with the Pixel camera?
Well, I never did get a hold of the photosphere, which was the big thing, trying to make the photosphere.
You couldn't do it?
I couldn't. No, I think it was a patience issue. It always turned out like something was invisible.
Yeah, it takes a long time. And really, to do it right, you've got to pivot in a very unnatural way, not, with you standing there. Like the best ones are done with actual small piece of hardware that the phone pivots on. It's a neat thing to have, but I mean, I never do photospheres. It's never the thing I think about when I'm at a beautiful view and I want to waste 15 minutes.
Yes, it's true. It really, because that's the thing. When you're taking photos, you're removing yourself from the moment. And with the photosphere, you're removing yourself from the moment for,
I'd rather have a 360 camera and just go boop.
Right.
And be done.
One more day you guys have to suffer with... it's almost like we made you dress in men's clothing and Jason dressed in women's clothing. It's
walk backwards for the next month.
Yeah, it's just a little uncomfortable, but you both managed. But I gather you're both anxious to get back to your home base.
It's familiar.